Right now on Upfront.
A special edition from our nation's capital.
Only in America would I have been able to work in such an awesome place.
The portrait unveiling of former House Speaker Paul Ryan, his legacy in Washington.
Paul Ryan has...
Well, look, there's great affection for Paul here.
And the impact ahead of 2024, with former President Donald Trump leading the Republican primary field.
He left because Trump was just a step too far.
The new interviews from Washington you'll only see here.
Then Democratic U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin seeking re-election.
We need to finish the job.
Her new interview from Washington and the Republicans potentially looking to take her on. A red line in Madison.
We are not going to take changes. We are not going to change the bill substantially.
Assembly Republicans saying they're done negotiating the shared revenue bill. So what's next?
And the debt crisis looming in Washington.
I've called this a phony crisis, and it is.
Wisconsin's delegation on a vote to avoid default. Up Front from Washington begins now.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. A consequential week ahead from Wisconsin to Washington.
Jaron, we're on Capitol Hill where debt ceiling negotiations are entering a critical week. President Biden returning here to Washington today. We're tracking it all with our Wisconsin delegation, plus our new interview with Senator Tammy Baldwin, officially launching her re-election bid, alongside the Republican challengers looking to potentially take her on. But we begin with former House Speaker Paul Ryan. Perhaps fitting, his portrait unveiling this past week comes amidst a looming debt crisis here in Washington and former President Donald Trump sitting atop the Republican primary field for president.
Party's hanging by a thread. You gotta save the party. Listen, no more QAnon.
The encounter we captured outside the Capitol this past week, perhaps symbolic of a new type of Congress.
You guys, because there's a deranged member here, so I'm gonna walk. All right, you guys have a great day. Take care.
Embattled Congressman George Santos just moments after the House voting down a measure to expel him. The same afternoon, just feet away inside the U.S. Capitol, the ceremony honoring former Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan.
Well, I hate to tell you, I don't pay any attention to Paul Ryan. He's no longer in power, and I wouldn't go look at his portrait anyways.
Inside House and Senate leadership, Democrats and Republicans. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, all in attendance.
Together, Paul, Eric Cantor, and I, we created something called the Young Guns Program. We defended fiscal responsibility and economic opportunity. We made a pledge to America, explaining we would govern differently.
The unveiling of Ryan's portrait now set to hang in the Speaker's lobby after serving as House Speaker from 2015 to 2019, including during the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Ryan, the Republican congressman from Janesville, first elected to Congress in 1998, a vice presidential candidate alongside Mitt Romney in 2012, who attended as well.
When I took the job, I don't know if you remember this, the last words that John Boehner said to me were, "Your job, Ryan, is to protect this institution. Don't forget that." Those were words that I took to heart, and they guided me every single day since then. When you are the Speaker, you develop an even deeper reverence for this building and this institution of Congress than I could have ever imagined. You come to understand that part of your job is to safeguard and preserve this historic institution during your particular moment in time.
The former House Speakers John Boehner, Nancy Pelosi, and Newt Gingrich all in attendance, alongside most of Wisconsin's congressional delegation, including Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin and Republican Ron Johnson, a perhaps rare bipartisan moment, yet rooted in tradition.
What do you make of this ceremony? Paul Ryan has...
Well, look, there's great affection for Paul here. There's a realization of how brilliant he is, how much he did to really create economic growth, and how much he dedicated himself to serving the country. So I thought it was a great moment for both Paul and his family.
He's not shy in his thoughts of Trump. What does that say about Republicans headed into 2024?
He does what?
He's not shy about his thoughts on former President Trump.
He doesn't have to be shy. He's his own free agent. He ought to say what he believes.
Ryan, an outspoken and unapologetic critic of former President Donald Trump, is now warning Republicans they'll lose in 2024 if Trump is the nominee. Ryan recently telling Upfront he won't attend the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee if Trump is top of the ticket.
I'll be here if it's somebody not named Trump.
You won't show up if it's not.
Yeah, I'm not interested in participating in that, no.
He's made his position on Trump very clear as we look ahead to 2024. What do we make of today's event?
Oh gosh, you bring a poke into this. Listen, the party changes from time to time. The party has always had this, like going back to the 1940s, a competition between isolationists and internationalists. So who knows? I mean, we got a lot of people running for president. Not everything's about Trump, but it was a cool ceremony that was not political at all, right? I mean, you had Democrat leaders talking on behalf of Paul. And really, I thought it was about the institution more than anything else. It wasn't about, it's like you guys disagree with Paul's conservative vision, but, at the end of the day, we all think it's special to protect the institution of the People's House.
And it was a time where I think, between the parties we worked together, probably even a little closer when Paul was Speaker. And I've got to bring a program back to my mother-in-law because she loves Paul Ryan, so I had to go.
What does he symbolize in terms of Republicans looking ahead?
Well, as a person who is concerned about the institution, concerned about policy and lawmaking, and he left because Trump was just a step too far. And unlike the current leadership among Republicans, he wasn't going to suffer Trump and Trumpism in exchange for being the Speaker of the House.
You were close with former Speaker Ryan during your time in Congress.
Sure
What's the delegation like now? Has it changed post-Trump?
Well, I just have to say that I have had many more conversations and engagements with Paul Ryan than I have some of the other members because things are so polarized. I mean, things were polarized then. But again, I think that the advent of Donald Trump has been very disruptive to our legislative goals here. And even though Trump has left, he has left his big, ugly footprint here.
Now, the question of Ryan's legacy, Trump's impact, and whether he or the party has changed.
He sure hasn't kept secret his thoughts on Trump, especially when we look ahead to 2024. What does he symbolize now in the Republican Party, Paul Ryan?
Well, I think, Paul's not a political guy. It's part of the reason why he got the respect, that he believed in core ideas. He certainly had conservative ideas, specifically when it came to free enterprise and opportunity, but wasn't a particularly political person. So I think he represents a fair number of people who are in the thought and the policy, but he was never engaged in the political realm. Even that's why a lot of people were surprised when Mitt picked him, but I thought it was a good choice because he had that respect of his colleagues even before he became the Speaker.
What do you think about him being so outspoken as we now look ahead to 2024 and Wisconsin being such a pivotal and critical state?
A play, but I think in the end, I think ultimately it's going to boil down to not what any of us, whether you're in office or formerly in office, say. It's going to boil down to the voters. I said the only person who will change people's mind for the better or worse about Donald Trump is Donald Trump.
Former Governor Scott Walker, Ryan, and Reince Priebus, then head of the Republican National Committee and former state party chairman, coined themselves the Cheesehead Revolution, Wisconsin Republicans ascending to national prominence. Walker and Priebus both at the ceremony.
Has that era of Republican conservatives fallen by the wayside?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the tax reforms that Paul talked about today, they're still fully intact. I don't think they're going away, and they're still having a positive impact. You look at what we did in Wisconsin, $15.5 billion worth of tax relief, massive reforms that empowered schools and others to staff based on merit and pay based on performance. Those are still intact. So while we may not each hold our respective positions, the policies are still working. And that's the ultimate legacy.
Jaron, Paul Ryan made no specific mention of Donald Trump in his address. Neither did any of the leaders, Republican or Democrat, in the House or Senate. Our coverage continues here from Washington. Up next, our conversation with Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin as she seeks re-election in 2024.
Plus, the shared revenue votes and negotiations in Madison, the red line Assembly Republicans are drawing, and what's next. Up front in Washington continues after this.